I'm Matthew Kerbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show.
Very, very excited to have with me today somebody who reached out after listening to the podcast, and we talked a while ago, and I'm thrilled she's here with me on the pod now as a guest. Aisha Jorge Massengill, welcome to Law Subscribed.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm so thrilled to be here.
So let's first learn a little bit more about you, and then I want to learn about, even though I already know, but we'll have that conversation again for the podcast, how you found out about Law Subscribed. So
Yeah.
first, let's learn more about you. What's your story as an attorney?
Sure. So it's almost obligatory as an attorney to talk in years of service, right? So I always say, despite my girlish appearance, this is actually my 29th year of practicing law. And I took a very traditional path of going to the firm life straight out of law school, because that's what you did. And right around the time where I wanted to start having a family and actually got custody of my 10-year-old sister, law firm life was not sustainable for me. So I actually made the pivot in house. And so I would say for the last 2 decades, I've been in house for a variety of companies, big and small. So that's kind of what I'd been doing for the last couple, almost 3 decades.
All right, well, let's stay there first, because every episode could be somebody's first episode of the podcast, even though at the time, like when this goes live, it will be into the hundreds of
Mhm.
episodes. So you had to pivot to in-house because that firm life was not sustainable. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Were you billing hours?
I was billing hours. I wasn't particularly good at it. In fact, the first firm that I worked for, every Friday, the managing partner would send out a list and you saw everybody's hours like for the week. So imagine how fun that was to see how you were ranking against your peers every week in the billable hour life. I wasn't particularly good at it.
Yeah, we did something like that at one of the firms I was with, where it wasn't like the actual amount of hours, because let's be real, like nobody's hitting their goals ever, but it was who's the top associate, who's billed
Mm.
the most or has their hours in, right? And they would do weekly, and then they would do who won for the month. And but even like even tracking your time, like the partners that would do that didn't even do that every week or every month. Like it was even just like our billing hours is aspirational. Doing that was aspirational.
And it doesn't take into account, the non-billable work that they have you do, like research this article for, this organization or something that's not billable. It's very, very frustrating. And I definitely was a victim of not having that rabbi early on. And I think about a friend of mine, and he's my big brother to this day. We're extremely close. But he had a partner who loved him because they both loved the Cowboys, who I hate. They both love the Cowboys. They both love to golf. And so they had that bond. And so he fed him. And it's just, if I could go back and tell my 25-year-old self, like how to be more successful, it's, cultivating those relationships and all the client generation, that if you don't have that rabbi in the law firm environment, it is just so, so difficult to be successful.
Yeah, yeah. So then let's talk transition from having to bill time to in-house. Like, what was that experience like?
It was amazing. It was, early on, I joke, there's a friend of mine, I just say, I'm just going to keep following you from job to job because it's work for me. A friend of mine who was at my firm, he went in house. He got a big promotion to the corporate office in Jersey. So he called me and said, Hey, I'm leaving my spot. My manager likes to hire by referral. He got me an interview there. And it was just, like I said, it was a really great time for me because I was, becoming a mom, kind of instant mom, but plus having my first son. And so the timing was awesome. And I just realized, like, as an employment attorney, it was a funny moment because I was pregnant and I was like, oh my God, I have to wear some kind of clothes that covers it up. And I go interview with my future boss, and she was pregnant. So to this day, like, we have kids who are the same age, and it just allowed me to relax. Like, okay, this is a place where that's not an issue. And I was managing employment litigation and directors and officers litigation for, one of the biggest property and casualty insurance companies in the world. So it was interesting in that, every day was different, even though the processes were the same. It's just like you would just have different cases, and you had to manage, anywhere between 85 to 110, depending on if we were up or down people, over the course of time. So that was interesting, just learning the process of like managing litigation. But I always say, as my kids got older and they had less use for me, that kind of gave me permission to get my hands dirty on more traditional in-house. And I also used to joke like, I need to get the stench of insurance off of me, because people didn't understand, like, what do you do what is managing employment litigation, what does that mean? So they didn't understand, like, oh, you're a lawyer still. And I was like, yeah. So I went and pivoted to another in-house role where I was the first employment lawyer that they hired. They had transactional lawyers and a GC, but I was the first employment lawyer that they hired. They were having some EEOC activity, et cetera. And so that
Mhm.
was an interesting change, very high stress environment. So I always say to folks like who think in-house is easy peasy, not so much, my friend. There's a lot of pressure. The only thing that is removed is that billable hour pressure, but actually the time demands oftentimes are heavier. It's people texting you, calling you, all, it's this sense of like always being available where you don't get to shut it off.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the demands on one's time aren't necessarily diminished because you're not billing your time, but I have to imagine that cognitive disconnect between having to track hours and that not being inherently valuable versus doing work for the company that is inherently valuable, like there's something just a little bit more fulfilling about that.
I do, and I just a personal kind of geeky part. I do a gratitude journal every day, and it's like 3 points of things that I'm grateful for, what makes my day great, and oftentimes I will conclude it like I've had a great day where I know I've added value. That's
Mhm.
super important when you know, like, you've given great advice, you've helped somebody solve a problem. Like, that's when I feel like I am giving the greatest value both to my client and to myself. It's not connected to the number of hours. Like, man, I spent all that time writing that letter. Like, no one does that. No one does that. It's really like I added value and I helped solve a problem. And I think that's the best part of in-house is, helping people solve those kinds of problems and adding value.
Yeah. Now, when you were managing litigation, were you controlling outside counsel's hours spent on that litigation? So you've
Oh,
been on the
yes.
other side?
It's incredible. First of all, so there's like a choice of counsel provision that most people put on their policy and never want to abide by. So the initial fight is like selection of counsel. And we used to always joke, like, you cannot buy a coach ticket and then want to sit in first class. Like, this is what you bought. We get to choose your lawyer. And the arguments are always the same. And it's a thread that actually carries through to today. And that is, they know us, they know our company. It's going to take time for the new lawyer to get up to speed. Well, at one point, your current lawyer had to get up to speed. It'll be okay. But you don't control their hours, but you do try to control the efficiency of it. Like, I am not going to pay to train your baby lawyer. I think that there's great value in your baby lawyer getting to go to the deposition, but don't bill me for that time because they're
Mhm.
observing. They're not adding value for me. So a lot of it is, and now, we talk about AI or other ways to gain efficiency. A lot of companies have outsourced the bill review process, but it used to be super tedious to sit there and review the bills, but it would be infuriating because it would be like, did that partner even look at that invoice before they sent it to me with all of this crap baked into it? And it's just like, nope, 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 not paying for that. So that was a big part of the job of like making them be more efficient in how they build us.
Yeah, yeah, and nowadays, I have to imagine, like, depositions are often always recorded, in part maybe because you want that AI to do its analysis on there, and now
Mhm.
an up-and-coming attorney can, like, go back and watch maybe at a faster speed, like, instead of just reading a transcript, because you can only get so much from reading a transcript about how to take a deposition, but now you can, like,
Yeah,
watch and listen
yeah.
at
Oh, yeah.
and consume more of that content than what it would have been there to sit, you know, synchronously. So many efficiencies there, and that's great to hear from that perspective. So then you, like, with your approach then, because we're now I want to learn, like, what brought you from being in house to wanting to start your own practice, subscription based, and like, but having that unique perspective of you build hours as outside counsel. Then you were in-house counsel managing outside hours. So now you have perspectives from both sides. So when you're crafting this practice for you to have to go into business for yourself, you're coming at it from a perspective, from multiple perspectives that some lawyers just don't have. I didn't have that many perspectives on it. And so what has that been like for you to have that? And then tell the listeners a little bit about, like, why you wanted to start to do what you're doing now.
So the interesting thing is, I decided mid-career. I remember this article. I think maybe the ABA wrote about it. That there's this 7-year itch for lawyers, where they're like, either you're going to be a partner in a firm, or this is the time you're like, I'm going to make the pivot. And I had that. I had the equivalent of that, and I dabbled with doing plaintiff side work. And I was like, "Oh no, no, no! This is not me. This is not for me." Like, I'm not doing that. So I went back to, being satisfied doing the in-house. A couple of things I think happened. I left an organization that I thought was my dream job. And the way that I described the thought process was, think about a stool or a table with a wobbly leg. The leg is uneven. And if you look at how the different legs represent pieces of your work life, I couldn't find a place to lean in where I felt stable.
Mhm.
And so I was like, well, that's the nudge telling me it's time to move on. And so I left, but I said I have certain operational obligations, so I still need to get another gig. And I quickly got another gig because I'm not stupid. I have to feed my dog and keep him up to the life to which he's grown accustomed. But something, hit me very early on in the new gig. When you work for a publicly traded company, it's same-ish, different day. There are certain levers that these companies have to pull when they experience financial challenges or different kinds of operational challenges. And I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I always, and the big thing is like reductions in force, which is a lever they pull to make the shareholders happy. And I always talk about that being a very sacred exercise, because I am always envisioning the person who has to go home at the end of the day and say, "Hey, babe, I just lost my job." And when you are behind the scenes and you realize like how fungible people are treated, it's just like, we have to hit this number. We have to. I was just like, it's a soulless exercise. And I really, in my grown up life, want to add value. The other piece is my need for connection. I'm in my fifth decade on the planet. And how I try to govern my personal life is, I don't want to be transactional. I'm really interested in being relational, whether it be in my personal relationships or my business relationships. And I said, I need to find something that feeds that. And so I said, okay, the other piece was, people kept asking me, do you ever do anything on the side? Do you ever pick up any cases on the side? And there was a woman who I worked with, she was head of marketing, and she DM'd me and she was like, I've got this small client and they realize they're big enough now that they need employment help. Do you do it? But I was still attached to the other company. And I was like, I can't. And then someone else asked me, do you ever take anything on the side? And I was like, eh. And I'm like, I'm getting all these signals that people value you, and you need to think about that. You're unhappy in this place. You can do it, but you're unhappy. And so that was really the genesis of why I was like, I need to think about what would that look like for me. And I have this thing on my wall that's over here that you can't see, but it says that growth and comfort can't occupy the same space. If you want to grow, you're going to be uncomfortable. So I can't be governed by my fear, right? Of, man, I have a good gig that's steady. I was like, no, we're going to try to plan and we're going to step out on faith. When I decided to step out, it wasn't originally on the subscription model. So even that was a bit of an evolution. But I am a voracious reader and consumer of podcasts. And I just found myself down these different rabbit holes. And so I found Kim Bennett initially. And I think
Mhm.
from Kim, I found you. I found Mr. Reeb. I found the gentleman who's in New Orleans. I think he's out of New Orleans. And so I just kept finding all of these, and I was like, this is great. Like, I can give people value. They don't feel like I'm nickel and diming. And the biggest obstacle from an advice and counseling perspective is people are scared to talk to the lawyer because they hear the ching ching ching. And I just laugh because I I have dealings with this amazing attorney at this huge firm, and he bills $1,600 an hour. So every time I'd call him, I'd be like, "Hey, here's a problem," because I'm hearing, and I was just like, "That's no way to live." So I'm like, I have to find a different way.
Yeah. 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 Sparrow Law Group, Andrew LeGrand was the other lawyer you were
Right.
thinking
That's
about.
that's his. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And yeah, Kim, obviously friend of the show, Fidu is the only tech platform that their main thing is to get lawyers
Mhm.
off the billable hour and use fixed fees and subscription, right? So they're in all my CLEs that I give. And so when you got started then, like, and I'm on your website right now. I mean, you want me to promote your website, right? Like, we're cool to.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Sedgwickandrews.com. First of all, what's behind the name? Because I'm curious to know about the branding. And then, like, folks should go check it out. Link obviously in the show notes. You make it really easy to schedule click a button and schedule a call with you. That's something that I do on my website,
Mhm.
right? That every lawyer should do. You got your pricing listed, so you're in the contingent of attorneys who are putting out public pricing information. Talk about consumer client friendly, right? So, like, what's the inspiration then behind all this and like these decisions that you've made?
So, with the name, Cedric Andrews is the intersection of two places that I grew up at in the Bronx, in New York City, where I'm from. I am a reformed point guard. And so the Cedric Housing Projects is where I honed my basketball skills. And it actually helped me be who I am today in the sense I always laugh. I said, I'm 5'3". Imagine I am 12 years old and I am on the basketball courts in New York City with men saying, I got next. Like, what kind of gumption does it take to do that? And, you had to wait for the big boys to leave the court. It was a whole process, but like, I would have next. And that was really important to me. So I talk about the fact that Cedric Andrews represents the grit and determination that a lot of small businesses have when they're trying to build their dreams. And I really firmly believe that those businesses should have the same kind of access to quality counsel that the big guys do. And what they
Hmm.
don't see is because they are so cost conscious, they don't see the value of that proactive nature. Like, let's get ahead of stuff. I have an awful saying, but people really get it. Where I say, once you go through the windshield, I cannot pull you back. So it's really important for us to talk about how can I help you up front. The idea of the pricing, I think you were a heavy influence of that. Another friend of your show, Lauren Lester, who is my coach, we also talked a lot about the value. And also, Robert Frost, I think it's Robert Frost, has a poem says, "Good fences make good neighbors. They keep people in and they keep people out." And so I really had to at first, I was really super nervous. Like, oh my God, people are not going to want to check it out because they'll see the prices and they'll be like, that's too much. Then that person's not for me because I have nearly 30 years of amazing experience and value to offer you. And I'm not going to sell myself short just to get a quick buck. It's not
Hmm.
for you yet. And maybe in time, you'll realize after you've been out there for a little bit that, oh, let me go back and check her out. So that is, my getting comfortable with the idea of putting the price in there. There's no hiding. And I think people find that very attractive.
Yeah, yeah, and part of it is too is I mean your pricing I think is very reasonable. I mean it also depends on your target market and all that, right? But I mean we're starting at $800 a month for a emerging business, all the way up to $3,500 a month for established business. And look, prices are subject to change. These
Mhm.
episodes are recorded long in advance. Prices go up, prices go down. Now you're doing something that I think makes a heck of a lot of sense. And I don't do it this way, but I know some other more and more lawyers are doing it. And I've even dabbled with it before. In particular, I think for litigation, this makes a lot of sense. You do leverage an initiation fee because let's be real. When you're onboarding a new client, there's tons of work to do up front, right? Like,
Mhm.
is that the main reason that you have that initiation fee?
It is, it's the primary reason, but it's also the psychology of your value. If there's anything, and I've, heard you talk about value versus time. I'm giving you value. And the last thing I've always heard people say, people are going to abuse your services. And so my thing is, if it's free, people don't value it. And so it's like, no, I'm giving you real value, and there's a cost that's associated with that. And so there is an initiation fee, because even the energy to take your documents and start to do an initial review of what you have and what you don't have, that, my it is time in a sense, but my exertion of energy has value, and I want to establish that very early on with my client.
Yeah, yeah, and some other great things on here. So highly encourage that folks check out sedgwickandrews.com/pricing. Is you've done a really good job at defining your subscriber benefits, right? And there's different approaches to this. You do list all the benefits, or a significant chunk of benefits. And I don't even necessarily list all the subscriber benefits on mine. And I get inspired by guests too. And so I'm thinking about like, oh, I like some of this stuff on here. Maybe I'm going to adapt some of that. But what you've done, and I think this is, and these days, like when I got at the mid level and at the top level, you've got priority scheduling, unlimited scheduled calls. So that's a really great way to break that down. And that's just the first benefit mentioned in each one. Now, what I would do in Calendly, and I'm curious to know how you're managing this, is I would set up a unique calendar invite for that emerging business client that's unique to them. And you can now set in Calendly, you could only book 10 of these types of this appointment a month. And it's easy to do. And then you never have to worry that they're going over. And if they if they want to go over, well, maybe you're no longer an emerging business, you're an expanding business, right? So like even just at that first subscriber benefit, you could easily see, okay, if they're utilizing your services, that's a great metric to say, okay, you're moving up a level because your needs are greater. Am I on to any of this? And then I'm curious to know, like, what tech are you using to confirm all of that and keep that within, talk about fences, right? Fence that in where it needs to be fenced in.
Yeah. It's not been as much of an issue. I do have different categories of client calls, the initial consultation versus the 60-minute client, the 30-minute client, the emerging, because I found your emerging business folks are the ones that will abuse your time the most, again, because they don't appreciate the value. If you have someone who's running a more sophisticated business, they don't have the time for you either, right? So like they want to be very, I have to move. I need you to answer this question. And I think they appreciate that they're not going to blow through the time. But what often happens is their issues are more pressing. And so for the larger size companies, like they may not use it as much, but when they need you, they need you. And so Calendly is one that I've used. I tried some other things, but I just thought the interface for me was just much easier. I'm not a tech person like you, but you inspire me. The one thing that I like challenge myself is to try to embrace the technology. The one thing I will talk about is I don't think I could have done what I'm doing now 5 or 10 years ago because of the way that technology has enabled a lot of the things that I do. Certainly not as a true solo, and so I leverage Calendly. I'm a Clio person for my practice management. So I use Clio, although I'm looking to transition the kind of the management side, not the CRM, but the management side to Fadoo, because they have just better interfaces for like your client portal, et cetera. It's like a little bit less clunky than Clio Manage, but I have Clio Grow and Manage. I have 650 thanks to you, and I got my discount, and they're amazing because of what I've heard you talk about before, the scale. Like I had to dig out of a little bit of a CLE hole. I have a couple of licenses in Pennsylvania requires CLE, and so they're really good with giving CLEs that are free, but you get your credits. But the updates that you get across 50 states is just really, really helpful to me. I also do Law 360 because I need to know what's the hot cases that just came. I had this awful experience. I'm still scarred to this day. It had probably happened 25 years ago, but I interviewed with this major, major labor and employment firm, like well renowned. And I had amazing interviews with like panels of 6 people. And I was like, I got this. But the partner, I had missed a recent decision that came out. And when I didn't get the job and actually asked for feedback, she named that as like, you missed this case. And for us, I think that's a little bit petty, but hey. But I said, but it was a good lesson learned of like, you have to stay on top of this stuff. So,
Mhm.
but I also wanted to get behind the paywall for Law 360, not just seeing the headline, but if I actually wanted to read the brief or read the article in greater depth, I do that. Asana is another one just to try to keep everything going. I dabble in Canva, but I have outsourced most of that to someone who is located in the Philippines who helps me, who's more gifted in that. And again, when you talk about the value of time, like that's not the best use of my time trying to design pretty things, for marketing purposes. And then like QuickBooks, just for the money part. And I do Clio Pay. I use that to get paid.
I mean, Aisha, what I'm hearing is if there is a playbook for starting a subscription-based tech-forward law firm, you are following that playbook, right? Like
Thank
you're
you. Yeah.
using the VA, to do things that are, that are not a valuable use of your time, right? Even when you're not billing your time is still valuable, right? So like outsourcing when it makes sense, leveraging technology, subscription arbitrage, right? Like the 650 subscription, right? Whatever that is, if you have one or two clients, and that helps you serve them, that more than pays for the subscription. And that leads into another question I have here, which is I see here you have when somebody becomes a subscriber, they get a discount on flat fee services. And so you're offering flat fee services in addition to what's offered in the subscription benefits. So I am curious to know, like what do those flat fee services look like, and do you offer them to non-subscribers at the full price, or is it just you just have that 5% discount to incentivize that the folks become subscribers?
Yeah, so the discount is offered to subscribers for the flat fee, and depending on it's 5, 10, and 15% off of the flat fee services, depending on the tier of the subscription. What I'm trying to convey is I have like one multi-state employer. They've selected the middle tier. I'm not going to try to upsell them, but what they'll figure out pretty quickly is after you've done a couple of projects that are outside of your plan, you've now paid for the next tier. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to give you the discount, but understand you're making a short-sighted decision. You're going to pay it either way because you need that work done. And one thing that Kim Bennett was really helpful in crystallizing is it's okay to lean into that first tier person and move them through your funnel. I think when I started, I was like, I want to get like the high end person. And it's like, no, there's a place for those folks, but you want to be careful because they may also like the complexity of their needs. You can't have too many of those folks or it'll
Right.
cannibalize you. And so it is kind of, hey, it's okay if they start at the beginning and move through the process. I do have kind of a list that I keep of potential additional projects that folks can use that I attach to the engagement agreement with them so that they can see like here's what you get, but here's some potential other things. And some of it may just be, if it's a handbook, the middle tier plan, you get 1 to 2 states. Well, if you blow through that, then you start to get into project land, especially if I've done your handbook and then maybe I've done sexual harassment training for your workforce. You've blown through your included plan, so now we have to do the other work you want to do at a fixed rate. And again, it would have been included had it's like how McDonald's or whatever, like if you'd have just paid the extra 30 cents, you would already have this taken care of. So that's kind of my mentality in it.
Yeah, and now I've got my thinking, what do I say on my website? Because I'm looking at yours right now, and I'm reminded that I see this happen all the time, and I know I've done it before too. Okay, no, I did make this update. So if people are hearing and they hear sexual harassment training, it's sexual harassment prevention training. It's like it's
Yes.
not it's not training people how to do it. It's
Yeah,
training people
that's
how to
true.
prevent it. And like when you're in the bubble of it, you know that obviously that's what you mean. But like I think I just saw the Chicago Bar Association put out their annual sexual harassment training, and it doesn't say sexual harassment prevention. So it's like, yeah, we get it. We all know, like, people who are
Yeah.
in it and need the training, we know. But just for other folks who may stumble upon it and be like, harassment training, what are you
Yeah, we're
teaching
not
over
training you
there?
to be harassers. That's a fantastic point. It's just like, used to say union avoidance training or anti-union training, and the way that we position it now is like positive employee relations. Because
Boom.
if you have
Yes.
positive employee relations, they're actually, from an employer management side perspective, no need for unions because what are they going to give you that you don't already have? So no, that's a great call out. I'll go take care of that.
Yeah, yeah, and that is, everybody who comes on the podcast learns a little something that they can take away home. That's my promise, right?
Thank you.
And,
Yes.
and, pros and cons, right? Because like now, when if you add in that word prevention, I don't know, that might bump it down, and aesthetically, like maybe it doesn't look as good as you want it to look.
Yeah.
So like, if people get it, they get it. So less is more with the wordiness on websites. So I'm sorry at the same time that I'm giving you another word to slot in. But moving right along, something that I like to talk about a little bit more with guests of the podcast these days is the getting clients of it all. Because,
Mm.
like I said, you're following the playbook. I think that's pretty clear. It also makes me think, okay, like what I'm doing, what Lauren's doing, what Kim is doing, like it's working. Like
Mhm.
you were able to find everybody, find the resources, follow the playbook. But even when you follow the playbook, you still got to get clients. So, you've done a good job building relationships. People were reaching out to you before you went solo. Hey, could you do this on the side? Could you do this on the side? Has that been the primary way you've gotten business, or what else are you doing to bring in clients into the firm?
Yeah, so I am a naturally impatient person. I believe and I know that I'm doing all the right things. That doesn't mean that it's happening at the pace that I would like. But and I would add, one of the interesting things for me is like I have a really good reputation nationally for speaking on these things. So 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, I was speaking at the ABA's Labor and Employment Conference. Another month ago, I'm with the American Employment Lawyers Council in California. But having to flip it and reverse it and be local has been a challenge because my connections are with these big companies. And so that's been a bit of a challenge. So to date, it's been a lot of organic leveraging relationships. And then some is just dumb luck. I was working out at my gym. This woman who is a friend, she's a professor at a college here, was giving me a hard time. She didn't see me. And I was just like, well, get your mind right because I'm about to be gone again. I'm about to go on the road. And they're like, what are you doing? I said, I'm a lawyer. I speak because I don't go around being like, I'm a lawyer. I just work out. And so they're like, you're a lawyer. And this other woman we know, she's, oh my God, we're like looking for building a relationship. And we're tired of just doing this like lawyer here, lawyer there, really looking for a relationship. And I said, that's what I do. Would love to have this opportunity to chat with you. And I immediately sent her off some of my materials that I have already in the can. And then we did a prep, I mean, an intake session, needs assessment. And they were saying, like, oh, I said, well, what's your timeline for making a decision? And they gave me weeks and weeks and weeks. And then the next day they were like, we'd like to hire you. And so that was just like dumb luck, right? And the funny thing, they stood me up. So this is also a lesson for your listeners. The first meeting we had scheduled, I don't know, some emergency happened. And they literally, I was sitting on the Teams meeting waiting for 30 minutes. And I was like, I'm on the line. And I just said to myself, hey, you have to get used to facing rejection and not internalizing it and not letting the opportunity go. So I always take every approach, every meeting that I take, it's there's no pressure for you to sign with me. I'm not pressed for you to sign with me. I'm going to tell you what I offer. I'm going to tell you the value that I bring. Sometimes the timing is not right. So my biggest thing is telling people what I do and asking them if they know people who they think can use my services. So that's kind of the old fashioned organic because all that I've heard from many lawyers is it's the referrals that are like the highest quality leads that you get because in a sense they've already been pre-qualified by someone else. I'm also, I can't even say dip my toe. I'm deep in the Posting on social, my primary focus has been LinkedIn and Facebook because I'm a B2B. And so, from what I understand with LinkedIn, they're less concerned about your actual company as opposed to like the value that you add, being that authoritative voice in your space. And they invite me oftentimes to these wonky little groups to comment. And so they're like, "You're an expert in this field. You're invited to comment." And I go and I make my comments. And so that's really been my focus. One tool that I'm actually looking into because someone else recommended is called Metricool. And there you can schedule all your postings. You have to link. So I don't know if, they probably have proprietary stuff, but Zapier, whatever. And you link with Metricool and you can schedule all of your social media content with them and they push it out on a schedule of your choosing. Right now, I'm just using the schedulers that are available in Facebook, Meta, Business Suite, and LinkedIn. And so I kind of try to block the time, Sunday at some point and get my posts together and then schedule them so I can set it and forget it. But that's been my focus is the organic relationship building. Yesterday, for example, you mentioned Chamber of Commerce. I went to local Chamber of Commerce meeting, made some great connections. There was a woman in local Society for Human Resource Management group, and there was a woman who we've met there, and we both were in this meeting. So it's like, hey, oh my God! So we have a call. That's another thing is like some of it has just been serendipity, but some of it is just being in the room where it happens, as they say in Hamilton. And so I was at a SHRM meeting. I happened to be sitting across from the woman who does programming for them. And I said, hey, I'd love to present to your group, no charge. So I'm going to be speaking with them in April on investigations. And then for my kind of law firm and corporate clients, that's a whole other tier dealing with investigations because that's for law firms, they want the litigation work. And so they don't want to be conflicted out. So when they have a sticky situation, there's an opportunity there. So it's just working those relationships that I've had over a number of years and just being patient, trying to be patient to let it build. And I can feel the momentum, even if it's not as fast as I would like it to be.
I mean, hey, look, the subscription model comports with that mindset because no one client is going to make or break the business. And when you get that client, the lifetime value is there, right? Like they're going to, they're getting the value. They're going to stay subscribed. They're going to move up the chain. And it's at that point, it's worth it. And when you're not, it's like dating, when you're not desperate, like the
Right,
things
you give
come
off the
in.
air, you give it off, like and so I really tried not to be that way. It's like if it's for you, it's for you, if it's not, it's not, I'll still be here if you have a change of heart. So it's been really good to me in that respect. I have a client who is a really good sized client. They're not ready to jump in because of the timing of some things. And I'm like, when you're ready, you're ready. So I do, because I have a personal relationship with that individual, I do a lot of like one off stuff. They're the only person, company, because I know the value of that work when it does hit, it's going to be awesome. So there's
Right.
no need for me to press now.
Right. Right. And I think, making exceptions to like to something like that can make sense, right? Like, look, I'm public about my pricing on my website are more guidelines. And if a client comes in and they don't perfectly fit into any of those categories, like I'll come up with custom pricing. I don't love to do that,
Mm.
but I do that. And the unbundled nature of my entry level, very low subscription with all a la carte pricing is to take care of those exact situations. But then that's like a whole other business model. And so for some law firm owners, the fewer business models we have to manage, the better. I know Kim Bennett recently, she talks about just starting with one subscription, not even
Mhm.
doing two, not even doing good, better, best pricing. So, not one approach is going to be the right way for everyone who's listening to this podcast and thinking, I want to be like Aisha and I want to start this thing and I want to do it. So we are getting close on time. So I want to be respectful of it. I do have to say, I pulled up Metricool, spelled just like it sounds, and it looks pretty cool. Like for solos like us, like
Mhm.
we don't really need more than 3 months of metrics. Like we don't really need more than 50 pieces of content per month. So like their freemium level It's
Right.
amazing. Like now, if we started out small, like our ideal clients, if we moved them up the chain, like that's their subscription business, right? They want
Mhm.
us to get successful with the posting and everything, and then maybe if that allows our business to grow, maybe it makes sense to start paying $18 a month. So it's really interesting. I'm definitely going to check that out. That's a big takeaway for me from this conversation for sure. Very cool. So as we start to wrap up the interview here, I was wondering about everybody these days in our profession, especially Gen AI. Are you using it? Are you playing around with it? Like, what's been your experience with that?
I'm all in. I'm all in. Oh gosh. I love Claude. I started with chat. My big win was I have young adult sons and I beat them to the punch. I'm like, "Hey, have you checked out this thing? Like it's amazing." And I just initially just started to playing around with it cuz the interesting thing about me is I'm normally the slow adopter to technology and I really in the context of having a solo practice saying like you can't do that. You have to really be an early adopter. I mean, I may not be the beta person, but I am like, I'm all in. And so initially started with chat and then I'll use both of them. I find Claude to be more like human sounding, but interestingly enough, they won't wade into legal questions. Claude will tap out quicker on a question that might touch legal than chat. Chat will be like, yeah, give you, but you got to, trust but verify. And so I love that. And there are a couple of there's a guy Jonathan Mast on Facebook who does a lot of free content, but he's like the AI guru, and so I just try to consume a lot of what he does and just really like because he's like the prompt king, and that's what you realize. It's all about your prompts, and so his that community is like next level for me in terms of diving in and it just like so I had my degree in English so I pride myself in being a great writer. What that causes me to do though is take too much daggone time, not from a billing
Mhm.
perspective but like I need to spit this out. And so to go and like have a conversation and be like, I am trying to write to a client that says da 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 da. Help me write something that balances the this with the that and have it spit out in 3.5 seconds and then go fix that. Same thing, I leverage it heavily in the posting. And so I'll tell it what I want. And then my own pattern is I infuse my personal piece at the top so that people know it's still a human. And I try to, because it is important to me to leverage my authentic voice. And so I will, mix, but it just helps me get over that initial hurdle of like, just get momentum, just get moving. So
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. One of the ways you might be able to get around the guardrails of they won't get too deep on the legal stuff is if you tell it, I am a lawyer. Like,
Oh,
like you tell it, I am a lawyer. So like they don't, it's not giving legal advice because you're the person who's interfacing with it. And Damian Real will say sometimes, "But you are a lawyer, so am I." So like
ah, I
it
love
takes
that.
on the persona of a lawyer, and then you're letting it know you too are a lawyer, so you could communicate at that level with the AI, and that could be a way to get around the guardrails. Another thing that I've seen done in particular for folks who are really good at writing, which is a lot of lawyers, but not all lawyers, is you could tell it even in that initial prompt or at a subsequent follow-up prompt, if you don't like the way things come out, is use active voice or only use active voice or
Mm,
primarily use, depending on how much active voice you want versus passive voice. And then another thing is you could tell it, remember, brevity is the soul of wit. Because sometimes these things will write super long, verbose, like
yeah.
it's way too many words. And so I love to quote a little Shakespeare when I can. And so you remind it, brevity is the soul of wit, and it will keep things succinct. Or you could just tell it, be succinct in your response, right? Um, and that's been some good techniques that I've been using. And I haven't used ChatGPT directly in a super long time, right? I'm still at the time of recording still primarily using Paxton, and I know that
Mm,
they're multi-model. So like sometimes I know when I had to translate something from English to Spanish and from Spanish to English, like I used Paxton to do it, but I also then went to ChatGPT since I know they do translation, and it was verbatim the exact same. So I'm pretty sure Paxton leverages OpenAI's models to do translations, right? So I know I'm using that model. I'm just not using it from OpenAI's platform directly.
yeah, right.
So love AI. We could talk about that all day.
Yeah.
uh, lastly, though, as we wrap up the interview here, I want to talk about something that I know hits home with you because when you first reached out to me, you talked about it, and that is the through line of this podcast in 100 something episodes, still the majority of attorneys leveraging the model are women attorneys and attorneys of color and women attorneys of color. And so that spoke to you, and I want to like hear from you about how and why that spoke to you, because that was something that I happened on and felt
Mhm.
like I needed to highlight for folks who were listening to the podcast, and then what that's like from your own perspective of what the profession, like how you experience the profession and why this works for you and why other people in your shoes can do it too.
No, thank you for that question and the observation because it did speak to me. And I hope what comes through to you and the listeners of this episode is value. And value is not only about the services you provide, but it's like your value as a person. And I think for women and attorneys of color in these spaces that are predominantly male and predominantly white, you can really struggle with that. And you hear people talk about imposter syndrome and all of that good stuff. But if you're fortunate, and I consider myself to be incredibly fortunate as a person who grew up in the projects with drug addicted parents and, father who went away to prison for 16 years in the middle of their high school career, I joke with my kids and I say, I'm a walking effing miracle. You understand? My value doesn't come from these institutions. My value comes from what I can provide to my clients, what I'm able to think through and achieve. It takes a long time to unwind that. And the way that I've chosen to do that is to do my own damn thing. I have chased all of the titles and I've done all the corporate America things where it's like I was associate counsel and I was managing counsel and I was senior director and I was vice president of a major, major global organization. And yet and still, I got to the point where I was left feeling empty. And you realize like your value comes from you. And so I think you have to walk in that truth. There was a post on LinkedIn that I commented on yesterday where a woman was talking about her hair and the things that we have to go through as Black women to be worried about other people's comfort around things that are innate to us. And I'm over that. But I am really fortunate to be delivered from that. And this is the vehicle for me. And it is an incredible sensation that you feel. People will ask me, like, have you been scared or nervous about your firm? And I said, yeah, there was a time when, I like having a couple of dollars. I'm not gonna lie about that piece. I like having a couple $100, but like I don't have fear about it because I'm walking in my truth of knowing what my value is. And I think for women and people of color, like it is a process and you just have to know that and doing my own thing has been the most excited I've been in my entire life. So that's how it's impacted me.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, we're not going to get any better than that. It does remind me, though, of how you were talking about how, these big companies, they do layoffs and they do it for the silliest reasons, like for shareholder approval. And so the fact that you think you have a comfortable job in a traditional gig, it's really just illusory. And
No.
and so if you go into business for yourself, like you've done, like so many of my listeners have done, yeah, it's scary. Yeah, things can happen, but you're in control. You're in the driver's seat.
Hmm. Yeah, I always say there's like a dead man walking thing where I would walk the halls and I know that I've been in rooms where they're talking about cutting you. They're talking about letting you don't even know. But they're like, and today it's yes and tomorrow it's no. You just don't know. And that I was just like, I can't abide in that anymore. It's just that's not I'm part of my job. I always tell people I have a sober job, but I'm a good time if you get to know me. So it's not like I don't walk through life, knowing like, hey, you have to advise people on terminations. That's the gig. But to do it in a thoughtful, sensitive way, and also to have control over your own destiny, there is incredible power in that.
Yeah. So we'll, like I said, we're not going to top that. So we'll wind up with the fun question. And I know you've listened to the pod, so you know it's coming. And that is a hot dog a sandwich and why?
As a New Yorker, I'm going to declare it so that it's done. It is not a sandwich. It is its own special category. And, I'm half Puerto Rican. It's not always in the bread. Sometimes we mix it in rice and beans. It can be a number of different things. It is its own category of a thing. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Love it. If people wanted to reach out, get in touch, learn more, where's all the places to find and follow?
Sure. So if you wanted to DM me, I'm on LinkedIn. I also have a website, topemployermistakes.com. I have a great free resource if you wanted to download the when you talk about avoiding issues, it's topemployermistakes.com that you want to avoid. And then on my website, cedricandrews.com.
That's a great call to action. I'm going to check out that website as soon as we're done here. All right. Well, one last time, Aisha, thanks again so much for coming on the show.
Matthew, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.